In our Revenova 7.11 release, we made several enhancements to our load tracking enhancements page and the tracking process as a whole. Take a look. Upon opening the load tracking administration page, you'll notice a few changes right off the bat. First and foremost, you'll see that we have added 3 new sections containing information related to the load, the customer information, and the carrier information. Now, each of these sections are field set driven, allowing you to customize the appearance of the load tracking administration page for your users. You'll also notice a few new fields on the page specific to the MacroPoint integration. These fields include tracking notes and the tracking update email list. The tracking notes field will simply add these notes to the MacroPoint page, as well as will appear in the update emails that are sent out according to our second field, which is the tracking update email list. The emails listed in this field will be included on any updates generated within MacroPoint. An interesting feature about these 2 fields is that they can be defaulted at the customer transportation profile level. So I will jump to a customer transportation profile, scroll down to customer load tracking, and you can see I have the tracking notes and the tracking update email list corresponding to those 2 fields that you saw earlier within the TP. Anything you enter in here simply shows up as the default, but you can absolutely, back within my load, change these notes according to your own preferences. Additionally, you can jump to the carrier transportation profile, scroll down to the tracking section, and find the tracking provider field. This works just like the defaults that I showed you on the customer TP. This field defaults the tracking provider based on the carrier that appears when you first open the load tracking administration modal. If you set MacroPoint as your default, MacroPoint will appear as the default. If you set Trucker Tools as the default, Trucker Tools will appear as your default, etc., etc. In addition to these additional fields, these new information sections, we've also made some changes to the appearance of the page as the tracking process runs. To show you how that works, I will jump into a quick tracking session, set up an example duration and update interval, and you can see that once I set my tracking session to on, what's happening here is that we're calling out to MacroPoint to initiate that tracking session, including updating the list of emails that will also receive updates when MacroPoint generates a status update. Now that our tracking session is on, I want to show you that jumping off of the page, navigating to any other section of the load, and then navigating back to the page, persistently stores the settings that you used when you initiated that session. You now see that the tracking duration I chose and the tracking update interval I chose at the very beginning will stay with you throughout the life of the load until you eventually turn off the tracking session, and it will reset to our defaults, just like we had when we opened the page at first. The last thing I want to show you is that we've also updated the process of removing carriers from the load in terms of how it relates to the tracking process. So I will elect to remove my carrier, Liverpool Reds Transport, from this load by clicking the Remove Carrier button. And you can see before I do that I have a load tracking session still initiated. When I remove the carrier, not only is the system now removing the carrier from the load and resetting the statuses, it's also calling out to my tracking provider, stopping that tracking session, and resetting the information to the defaults. Whereas previously you may have had to take multiple steps to complete this process, it now is completed in one fell swoop when you remove the carrier from the load. As you can see, we've made multiple enhancements to the load tracking process in 7.11 that we believe will make it quicker and easier for your users.